It is November 29th, 1970, a gray, cold Sunday morning in Bergen, Norway. Two hikers are making their way up through Isdalen, the narrow ravine on the outskirts of the city that locals have called the Valley of Death for generations, though no one alive quite remembers why. The name feels different today. The smell reaches them before they see anything. Charmical, something burning, or something that was. There, among the rocks and the frost-bitten birch trees, roughly a kilometer from where the trail begins, lies a body. A woman. She has been burned so severely that recognition is almost impossible. Around her, an arrangement of scorched objects, a travel bag, some bottles, remnants of clothing, all of it deliberate somehow. Not the chaos of an accident. The cold, careful geometry of something planned. Norwegian police are called. When officers arrive and begin cataloging the scene, they notice something deeply unsettling. Every label has been removed from her clothing, every garment tag, every brand marking on every item she carried. Her shoes have had their serial numbers removed. A bottle found nearby contains the dregs of a liqueur, laced with phenobarbital, a powerful sedative. The fire, it turns out, was not what killed her. The fire was meant to make sure you never found out who did. This woman arrived in Bergen with no identity anyone could confirm. She would leave it the same way, and the mystery she left behind has haunted Norway and the world for more than 50 years. Bergen, Norway in 1970 is a prosperous, cosmopolitan port city, scenic by any measure, with a busy railway station connecting it to the rest of the country and, through international rail and air links, to the wider world. It is a city accustomed to travelers, to faces that pass through and disappear. A city where a single foreign woman traveling alone would draw only passing curiosity. In the weeks before her body was discovered, a dark-haired woman of Southern European appearance had been moving quietly through Bergen's hotels. She stayed at the Hotel Neptune, at the Rosenkrantz Hotel, at other establishments too, where staff would later describe the same impression: quiet, well-dressed, composed, reserved. She spoke multiple languages, fluent German, fluent French, and some English, yet deflected extended conversation with practiced ease. When asked her nationality, her answers were vague, shifting. She had arrived in Bergen by train from Stavanger sometime in mid-November 1970. But where had she come from before that? Witnesses remembered she traveled with multiple suitcases and always seemed to be watching. The exits, the other guests, the windows looking out onto the street. Not with anxiety exactly. With the calm, measured attention of someone who had learned over a very long time to stay alert without appearing to. Hotel staff recalled her paying in cash, always the exact amount, never requiring change. No small talk, no lingering in the lobby, no calls made from the room telephone, a detail that, in 1970, was unusual enough to stick in people's memories long after she was gone. She had the carefully maintained invisibility of someone who had spent years making herself easy to overlook. Even to the people who met her face to face, she was already, in some essential way, a stranger. In the immediate aftermath of the discovery, Bergen police launched what would become one of the most exhaustive and ultimately frustrating investigations in Norwegian criminal history. Detectives documented the scene with meticulous care. They recovered burned remnants of her belongings, scraps of clothing, a partially melted rubber boot, a broken umbrella, remnants of a sleeping bag frame, a melted watch. An autopsy was performed, and the results were deeply disturbing. The cause of death was determined to be a combination of phenobarbital poisoning and carbon monoxide inhalation, meaning she had almost certainly been heavily sedated or had taken the sedatives herself, and was likely already unconscious or dead before the fire was set. The fire was not what killed her. The fire was what came after, an attempt to destroy the evidence of what had already happened, an attempt to make her impossible to identify. But had someone done this to her, or had she done it herself? Police traced her movements step by step. Her fingerprints were lifted and submitted to Interpol. No match was returned. Her physical description: dark hair, olive complexion, approximately 5 feet 4 inches tall, estimated age between 30 and 40, was circulated across European law enforcement networks. Still nothing came back. Then came the suitcases. Stored at Bergen's central railway station, 2 unclaimed pieces of luggage were connected to her. Inside, investigators found clothing, cosmetics, travel maps, a small portable stove, a yellow raincoat, rubber boots, and a dark wig. Every single item had its labels removed. Even the soles of the shoes had their markings filed away. But scattered among the items were receipts. German receipts. And when investigators began following those paper trails, they stepped into something far larger and far stranger than a single unidentified death in a Norwegian valley. The receipts led Norwegian detectives across borders and into a web of false identities that stretched across at least 8 countries. The woman had used a minimum of 8 confirmed aliases, each registered at hotels across Germany, Switzerland, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Italy, Denmark, and Norway. The names included Claudia Nielsen, Elizabeth Lienhauer, Vera Jarl, Genevieve Lancier, Alexia Zarna-Merchez, Henriette Caillot, Fenella Lorch, and Claudia Tielt. Each name was plausible enough to satisfy a hotel front desk in 1970, an era before computerized identity checks, before instant cross-border database queries. Each was deployed in a different country, in a different context, with apparent fluency in local customs and often the local language. And each, when investigators tried to trace it further, dissolved into nothing. No matching national identity document. No corresponding birth record in any registry. No family who recognized the name. This was not a woman using a false name to escape a difficult personal situation. This was a woman operating a professional alias infrastructure, the kind of multi-identity network that intelligence services trained their operatives to maintain throughout the Cold War. The kind of system that required institutional resources, advanced planning, and ongoing support from somewhere outside herself. Among her belongings, investigators also found notes, a series of symbols and character sequences that initially defied interpretation. Cryptographers eventually analyzed them and identified a simple cipher, a form of encoded shorthand that appeared to be a travel log or an operational itinerary, with entries that corresponded, investigators believed, to specific cities, dates, or contact points. She was not keeping a diary. She was keeping operational records. And she had encoded them precisely because she did not expect anyone outside a very specific, very closed circle to ever read them. The Cold War context is impossible to separate from this case. By 1970, Europe had been in a shadow battlefield for more than 2 decades. NATO and the Warsaw Pact maintained vast parallel networks of intelligence operatives, men and women trained to assume false identities, establish convincing cover stories, gather strategic information, and disappear without a trace. Ordinary-seeming people, living ordinary-looking lives in ordinary cities, who reported to handlers they might never meet in person. Bergen was not a random location on her itinerary. The city sat adjacent to critical NATO naval infrastructure. Norwegian fjords sheltered Western submarine operations. Strategic communication lines passed through the country. Bergen was exactly the kind of city where a trained intelligence operative would have a genuine reason to be present. Norwegian intelligence, the PST, or Politiet Sikkerhetstjeneste, took a serious and early interest in the case. But when journalists and cold case researchers, in subsequent decades, submitted formal Freedom of Information requests for the PST's files on the Isdalen woman, they discovered that significant portions of those files remained classified, withheld well beyond standard declassification timelines, with no public explanation offered for the continued restriction. What was in those files? What had Norwegian intelligence known, and when had they known it? American intelligence professionals who have publicly studied the case have commented on her apparent operational profile. Former CIA analyst Donald Doyle described her alias rotation, her cash-only discipline, her language capabilities, and her meticulous destruction of identifying information as consistent with a trained Western intelligence operative, not a Soviet bloc agent. The methodology, he suggested, pointed to someone who had received formal instruction on exactly what to do if her cover was compromised. But no intelligence agency, Western or Eastern, American or European, has ever officially acknowledged that she existed. For nearly 5 decades, the Isdalen woman's case sat in Norwegian police archives, consulted periodically, never closed, and never solved. Then in 2016, Norwegian newspaper Dagbladet published a major investigative series on the case, reigniting intense public attention and prompting Norwegian police to formally reopen the inquiry with access to modern forensic resources and technology that simply had not existed in 1970. For the first time, DNA was successfully extracted from the woman's teeth, one of the few biological materials that had survived both the deliberate fire and 50 years of storage. Stable isotope analysis was then performed on those same teeth, examining the distinct chemical signatures left in dental enamel by the water, food, and environment a person is exposed to during childhood and adolescence. The results were significant. The isotope profile pointed strongly to a German-speaking region of Central Europe, most likely Germany, Austria, or Switzerland, as the woman's place of origin. A forensic facial reconstruction was developed using digital technology and released publicly in 2017. The face that emerged was that of a woman in her late 30s. Strong, symmetrical features, dark eyes, a composed expression. It was shared internationally across news outlets and social media platforms in multiple languages. Hundreds of tips flooded investigative channels. None led to a confirmed identification. In 2019, a detailed scientific paper was published in the peer-reviewed journal PLOS ONE, authored by a team of Norwegian forensic researchers and explicitly calling for international scientific cooperation in resolving her identity. Her mitochondrial DNA profile was entered into genealogical databases. Researchers hoping to find a partial familial match, a distant cousin, an ancestral thread, came away without a confirmed genetic link. She was buried in Bergen's Møllendal Cemetery in 1971, given a proper funeral by a city that did not know her name. Her headstone reads simply, Ukjent kvinne, unknown woman. More than 50 years after 2 hikers stumbled upon a burned body in a Norwegian valley, the Isdalen woman has not been forgotten. Not in Bergen, and not by the global community of researchers, journalists, genealogists, and amateur investigators who have made her case a sustained and serious cause. In 2017, the BBC produced a multi-episode audio documentary series dedicated entirely to unraveling her story, drawing on Norwegian police archives, Cold War historians, forensic scientists, and surviving witnesses who had encountered her in the weeks before her death. The production brought unprecedented international attention to the case and generated thousands of tips, a wave of public engagement that the renewed Norwegian investigation attempted to channel into productive leads. Norwegian broadcaster NRK has revisited the case in multiple formats over the years, keeping it alive in national consciousness. Former Bergen detectives have spoken on the record about the particular frustration of investigating her, the persistent sense, they described, that the truth was somehow just millimeters beyond reach, that someone, somewhere, knew exactly who she was and had chosen deliberately not to say so. Interpol's Cold Case Division has formally consulted on the file. International genealogy volunteers have donated hundreds of hours analyzing her DNA profile against public ancestry databases. Academic researchers have incorporated the case into broader studies of Cold War intelligence methodology and the ethics surrounding unidentified human remains. And in Bergen, at Mellendal Cemetery, the grave of the unknown woman continues to receive visitors from around the world. Someone, and it is not entirely clear who or how many different people, continues to leave fresh flowers on the headstone. The city has not stopped caring. The world has not stopped asking. Those flowers suggest that even strangers feel, on some level, that she deserved far better than this. The Isdalen woman died in the last days of November 1970 in a remote Norwegian valley that had been called the Valley of Death long before she arrived. She was burned. She was alone. And whoever she was, she had spent years constructing a life, or rather, multiple lives, specifically designed to leave nothing traceable behind. In that, at least, she succeeded completely. More than 5 decades later, she remains a ghost. Was she a spy? The evidence is circumstantial, but genuinely difficult to dismiss. The alias network spanning at least 8 countries. The encoded notes found among her possessions. The cash-only discipline that left no paper trail. The systematic destruction of identifying information from every single item she owned. The Norwegian intelligence files that remain partially classified to this day, with no public explanation. The fact that in over 50 years, no government, no family, no intelligence service, no organization of any kind has come forward to say, that was our operative, that was our daughter, that was our colleague. We lost her. Somewhere in the world, a family lost a woman, a daughter, a sister, perhaps a mother, and either chose not to come forward, or was instructed by someone with authority over them not to. Or perhaps they were simply never told she was gone. Perhaps they have wondered all these decades why she stopped writing, why she stopped calling, why she never came home. The investigation remains officially open. Norwegian police still accept tips. Researchers are still running the DNA against new databases as genealogical science advances. The questions have no answers, not yet, and perhaps not ever. What we are left with is a reconstructed face on a poster, a name no one gave her carved into stone in a Bergen cemetery, and the persistent, unsettling suspicion that someone, somewhere in the world right now, knows exactly who she was, and has been silent all this time, for reasons we may never fully understand. If this case keeps you up at night the way it does me, hit subscribe, and drop your theory in the comments below. The Norwegian police are still listening. Maybe you have a piece of this that no one else does.